diamonds and gold are there. Copper, aluminium, all this other stuff, it's hidden away.
We often focus on companies like Tesla or ARM, but we rarely think about the materials that make their technology possible. Ed Conway is the economics editor for Sky News and author of Material World.
If we can't understand, or if we don't understand the world we live in right now, how on earth can we possibly understand the world we want to live in?
I walked around Queen's Park last night, listening to Madonna's Material Girl.
Oh, there we are.
Yeah, just because of
It's my theme tune now.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I was like looking through all of the windows, just thinking like, people just have no idea that this ethereal world versus the material world, as you call it. And sorry, we're hitting it already.
I've got to.
Yeah.
Please explain to the audience what the ethereal world is. It's not ethereal.
Okay, all right. We're gonna have a few of those, aren't we?
Yeah.
So it's an idea. I've made it up, and I made up the idea of the material world as well. But the ethereal world is kind of, for me at least, it's the world that most of us inhabit, where we just think that all that matters is like brain power and ideas and physical stuff, getting stuff out of the ground, turning it into products, and providing that kind of infrastructure. We just don't really think about that stuff much. But the problem with being in that kind of world of like brain space is all that matters, ideas are all that matter, is you forget that we're still reliant on the physical stuff. Like that we can have this conversation, we've got all of this stuff around us. It's all come from the ground. It all had to be mined out of somewhere and turned into a product. And so the ethereal world is when you all work in services, and most people are, financial services, that's a big part of the world, but also lots of other services, retail and stuff. You can just lure yourself into thinking that is everything. Mm-hmm. And the point of the material world is to say, no, there's this little, it may just be a small part of GDP, but there's this little layer that is underneath every other part of activity, every other activity in the economy. That layer is all important, because without that, everything else
is gone. It's the bottom Jenga block, isn't it?
It's the bottom Jenga, exactly.
Yeah, you pull that out.
It's the foundations, and it all goes. And it turns out, actually, when you look at the foundations, because no one's been focusing much on this stuff, because we're all in the ethereal world, it turns out there's just loads of interesting stories that have been kind of untapped for a long time. So that's the ethereal world.
You focus on six. You focus on six materials. They are, well, you can say what they are.
Okay, all right. Sand, salt, iron, copper, oil, and lithium.
Yeah. Why those six?
Well, it's not a definitive list. There are other materials maybe available. But it's just a good starting point to start thinking about, okay, this physical world around us, how does it actually come about? Where does the glass come from? Where do the silicon chips come from? Where does the concrete that's kind of underneath the literal foundations of our world, where does it actually come from? And a lot of that, that's sand. Sand that goes into glass. You melt down sand and you get glass, particular types of sand. You've got to have the right sand. You put the right kind of sand into a mix with a few other materials and you have concrete and cement. You get a particular type of silicon, so it's kind of called quartzite. Technically not a sand, but it could be a sand in chemical terms. And you melt that down and go through an incredibly kind of detailed process, and you end up with silicon chips. So each of these things allows you to kind of tell the story both of the history of the physical world around us, but then also, you've noticed two of the materials are oil and lithium. So, oil, that's part of the big fossil fuel story of our age today. I mean, pretty much every product we touch on a daily basis will have some kind of connection with petrochemicals, like it or not. The world is still run to some extent on oil and gas. We still, when we're eating most of the food, like 90% of the food in the world is fertilized with fertilizers that come from gas. So we are quite literally actually consuming fossil fuels on a daily basis. But because we're not spending that much time thinking about how does this world actually come into place, I think we're slightly deluded as to the extent to which we're reliant on this stuff. And so really the point of, why those six, for a book, it just gives you a kind of this arc to be able to tell that story about the world that we inhabit. But like I say, I agonized over which things to include, because there are loads of other things that are really important, titanium, aluminium, I wondered about whether should I include cobalt rather than lithium for the battery chapter, because obviously the mining of cobalt, as you'll probably have seen, a lot of that happens in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The conditions are pretty abysmal.
Seriously bad condition, wars and child labour and all sorts of things.
Yeah, and actually there are very few materials which are quite so concentrated into one place.
You call it like truly unique place.
Yeah,
exactly. most minerals are spread around. They have everything essentially.
So I kind of thought maybe that's the story. As a journalist, I'm a journalist. I kind of thought, well, that sounds like the obvious kind of compelling story, because it's like it's there in one place, everyone's reliant on it. But I had to decide between that and lithium. And actually, the interesting thing about cobalt is, for all of that tragedy and for all of what's happening in the DRC, we are getting a lot better at making batteries without cobalt. So we still have them, in your iPads and your mobile phones and everything else. But in a lot of electric cars these days, like the Tesla Model 3, the kind of low range, at least Tesla Model 3, that's got a type of battery that doesn't have any cobalt at all in it. And so over time, there are these amazing advances that are happening. But again, the lesson the material world is, because so much of it is happening beneath the surface of the items that we use, and because not many kind of companies or people are talking about the wonder of what's going on inside, I just feel like so much of it is hidden. Like batteries, okay, for instance. Do you know that they literally kind of expand and contract as you're charging them and using them?
13% was it, or something?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
you said in the book.
They're moving, and like you think about this.
Your phone's going like this. It's like pulsing.
It's mental, isn't it? And that is happening there. There's this life beneath the kind of surfaces of all the items we're using. And some of it's like the complex items, but like technology. But some of it's just simple stuff like concrete. Concrete is still, right now, it's the most boring material in the world, supposedly. But all that concrete out there in the city, it is still kind of inhaling. Concrete is inhaling some of the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and using that to cure itself, to get kind of harder. So there's this living world around us, hidden within the seemingly boring material objects that we don't spend much time thinking about. And the more you kind of probe, the more of those stories there are, it turns out.
I want to talk about some of this, because I think the battery point especially, because it's so interesting to people, and Elon is such a big character and he's at the heart of that. The idea that my iPhone is powered by brine, like, kind of blew my mind.
Yeah.
Like salty water that's sat, still in Chile for 3 million years, and now you break a layer of the salt crust and suck it out and turn it into a battery. It's kind of crazy, right?
It's totally.
You say this like beautiful thing of, it's the paradox of the materials of the old world powering the new.
It's like so the place that you're talking about is the Salar de Atacama in
I wasn't going to try and say it.
Say that for us, Damo.
Salah who? Mo Salah?
Mohammed Salah?
Yeah.
The Salar de Atacama. It's like the Salar is like a salt lake in South America, and it's a really bizarre place. I went there and I kind of stood on the salt lake. I went kind of strode out onto this enormous crackly surface of salt, and it turns out that in some places it's maybe kind of a meter thick, and in some places it goes down much further. But beneath that big crust that you can look up the pictures, beneath that crust there's this enormous kind of underground reservoir of briny water, so salty, and in this case it's got all of these unusual salts, including lithium. And it's a surreal place. And, part of the explanation for how on earth all this lithium ended up being there, I mean, they're still debating it now, but this is one of the driest areas in the world. It's this dry desert. You've got the Andes as well. And just due to these strange geological conditions, this stuff has just gathered there over millions of years. And so you have this strange, it's quite a kind of vertiginous feeling. You're standing there thinking only a few, feet beneath me is this ginormous kind of vat, this reservoir of lithium and all these chemicals. And then I was standing out there on this kind of crackly surface, and then someone over there shouted, "You're not supposed to be there!" And it turns out you're not supposed to walk on there because like the salt is so sharp that if you fell over, it would just slash you. And so then I kind of was like, okay, how do I get back?
Don't fall over.
But you take a picture with your phone that's powered by that juice.
And that juice, we get the they literally kind of pump the brine out of the cell arm. And this is like there's other ways to get lithium, but this is the biggest reserves of it right now. They pump the brine out, and then I think what's even more mind blowing is one of the materials in this book is salt, and it's like I reckon the most underrated of all. And in the ancient era, in order to get salt, the Phoenicians back in the kind of 2,000-3,000 years ago, they worked out that they could just create these little pools. So you take the seawater and you just channel it into these evaporation pools. And gradually over time, the sun does its work and that kind of precipitates away the salt and you're left with these piles of salt. And that's how, in ancient ways, they used to make salt, at least in hot countries. The way that they get the lithium out and they precipitate away all the other salts, today, for lithium-ion batteries, is the same way that people were doing it 3,000 years ago in the Mediterranean. They're using the same evaporation pools, except this time the pools are much bigger. So you look on Google Maps and you can see.
They look beautiful, but they're kind of like weird, aren't they? They're like blue and yellow, and isn't those like...
Yeah, and they're visible from space.
Yeah.
They look beautiful because the colours are actually down to the kinds of things that are the chemicals that are left in there. So actually they're green towards the end. It goes greener and greener as you evaporate more and more of the other stuff away. And the greenness isn't the lithium, it turns out. The greenness is, I think, boron, randomly, because they've still got some boron left. But eventually you get left with this concentrate. And it's the weird thing about lithium. So again, this is the stuff that's inside our batteries that's powering your smartphone. It's also like really, it's a lubricant. It's the ultimate lubricant.
The ultimate lubricant.
The ultimate lubricant. You use lithium. Just bear with me.
You should have called your brand lithium, the ultimate lubricant.
Doesn't it explode?
You use lithium. It is mostly used for hardware purposes, like for
don't put it on your software.
Machinery.
Don't get any ideas, T.
For machinery. For machinery, and so actually there's this slightly random consequence of the fact that lithium prices went through the roof. I mean, they've come down a bit now, but they went through the roof, and suddenly all these people working in kind of hardware and machinery were having trouble because they couldn't get the hold of the lubricants they need. But anyway, you can put your finger into this liquid of lithium, and it's kind of weird because it's just the feeling of this liquid is strange and incredibly slippery, and you know that inside there, once that's being processed, that is going inside the the electric cars and all of the devices we need today. And the reason why lithium is so important is, we've committed to all of these environmental goals. We just don't get there without batteries. You can have a long conversation about net zero, but the technology is just not going to happen if we don't have batteries. Leaving aside, we wouldn't have smartphones if it wasn't for lithium-ion batteries. And actually, to me, the wildest thing, is that 100 years ago, when cars were first becoming a thing, or 120 years ago, it was not a foregone conclusion that it was going to be the petrol car, the internal combustion engine, that was going to win out that battle. You had, at the same time, people with battery cars. This is, in 1900 or so. You had battery cars doing the streets of New York and London. You had steam-powered cars, so like steampunk cars. And you had petrol cars. And the reason, actually, in many ways, electric cars were better because the motors are more efficient, just a better way at turning energy into movement. But the reason they didn't win out was just because the batteries were rubbish. They just couldn't make a long-range battery. And so if we had lithium-ion batteries and worked out how to do that, and it's hard to get that salt out and turn it into something that you can harness. But if we'd had that, the world would have been a completely different place. History would have been different. We would
to invent a car as well at the time. Do you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they were doing amazing things, weren't they?
They were doing amazing things, but in a weird way, the one bit that was missing that actually would have made everything a lot more easy. Because if you think about a car today, think about like an internal combustion engine. It is one of the most extraordinary things that humankind can make. It's mental, hundreds, if not thousands, of different parts that are clanging away. Inside, you have explosions happening. It's designed to create explosions and harness that into movement and not break down. Yeah,
mine breaks down a lot. See, all the thousands of parts are broken down on mine. But yeah.
But that's the thing, isn't it? They are quite complex contraptions. And actually, the interesting story, like right now, is to make an internal combustion engine turns out to be like really difficult. And that is the one thing that China has really struggled to do for years and years and years. That it was not for nothing that it was mostly European, American, and Japanese companies that were able to dominate car manufacture. Making an electric motor is a very different thing. It's actually much easier. There's fewer moving parts, and it's kind of just wiring copper into it in a particular way. And the fact that China is now kind of winning out in the electric car business is partly a story of the fact that we've shifted. It's this disruptive innovation moment. We've shifted from that amazing contraption with all those hundreds of different parts, which we're really good at making, to this other business entirely. Making electric cars is just another world.
One of the worst things that I see in my world is scammers who pretend to be me or the podcast and then try and get money out of people who follow us. And sadly, these scammers are getting better and better by the day, which is one of the reasons that we're really happy that we're partnering up with Vanta, who help businesses be secure and then prove that they're secure. Vanta automates compliance for stuff like GDPR, ISO 27001, SOC 2 and more, helping businesses build customer trust. The beauty of Vanta is they save companies a lot of time and money because proving you're secure without them really is an enormous faff. It can take months of work and form filling. Over 9,000 companies like Atlassian, Flow Health and Cora use Vanta to manage their risk and prove their security in real time. If you need to prove that your business is secure and compliant, you can get $1,000 off by going to vanta.com/makingmoney. I've left a link in the description for you.
But you speak about, China winning, and I think there's a lot of paranoia around who's going to control the batteries, who's going to control electric. We see America saying, we're going to pull up the drawbridge. What I got from your book was that the world is so connected that people are going to have a really hard time doing that.
Totally.
Do you think that's the case?
I think, I think in practice, yes, because the stuff, the stuff that comes out of the ground, you can't control where it's coming out of the ground. The complexity of turning that stuff that comes out of the ground. Think about a semiconductor. Okay, so when you get that lump of rock out of the ground, so the computer chip that goes inside our smartphones, our computers, everything basically, because most devices these days have a semiconductor one way or another. That thing is a little piece of silicon that's come out of the ground a long time ago as a lump of rock, a lump of quartz. And in order to turn that quartz into a silicon chip, that needs to go through so many different processes. It needs to be broken down, kind of melted down, reconstituted time and time and time again, just to get it to a level of purity and a level of perfection. I mean, actually, the silicon chip, we don't bang on about it enough, I think, but the silicon chip is the most, even the wafer that you're then imprinting all of these little transistor switches on. And those switches are amazing. The switches are smaller. I always find this kind of mind-blowing. They are so small that they are invisible. You cannot even see them because they are smaller than the wavelength of visible light. So even if you had the best optical microscope in the world, it would just see a flat surface. I find it, you need...
So how did they use machines to...
They used machines that are able to work at wavelengths that are smaller than light. It's totally science fiction. It's totally science fiction. There's one company in the world that can make those machines. One company in the world, a company called ASML in the Netherlands. And the way that they do it is even more kind of like sci-fi-ish. Like no one would make this up. They have this kind of machine that has this vacuum vessel inside. This, by the way, is just to create. So what you need to do, because light is so big, and the wavelength of light is too many nanometers wide, you need to create a form of light that's much smaller than that, so that then that light can basically zap certain shapes onto this silicon, and you're zapping the shapes, and that shape eventually becomes a switch, and that's your switch transistors, and you have billions of them to create, the technology in all of our devices. In order to create that light, just the light, they need this machine called an extreme ultraviolet lithography machine, which drops inside this vessel. In this vacuum chamber, it drops down molten tin. So you've got molten tin being melted. It drops it down at a really, terminal velocity of molten tin, whatever that is, inside this kind of vessel. One laser and then two lasers, both of which happen to be the two most powerful lasers in the world, smash that into this, into smithereens. And in that process, literally, as it falls down, laser, and that explosion creates a teeny tiny bit of extreme ultraviolet radiation or light or whatever you want to call it. And that's going bang, 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 all of that time, just to create little tiny bits of light that then funnel through these mirrors, which, by the way, are the most flat surfaces. The mirrors that they create, which are made of glass, which is made of sand, which is back to the book. But the mirrors, if you expanded these mirrors that are about the size of a kind of small pizza, if you expanded these mirrors to the size of the continental United States, the biggest deviation, I think, would be less than a millimeter. Those mirrors then bounce this light down onto your waiting silicon wafer in order to create something that is smaller than light. And it's smaller than a coronavirus, these transistors. So all of that stuff is amazing. But in order to get a kind of silicon wafer, the thing you're bouncing it onto that you're then kind of grinding bits off to create your little transistor that goes into our phones, so that we can then use them and go, oh, it's a bit slow today. But it's like, oh, you know, it is amazing what's going on in there. But even before you're getting to that, you need this little bit of silicon wafer that has been taken from a rock in the ground, blasted out of some quarry and turned into something that is the most perfect thing that humankind has ever made. So if I've talked about the flattest thing in the world, but this is the most perfect thing in terms of the chemical structure.
Hey, you, mate.
You can see the pain in my heart.
It's among the most perfect things that, but this is the most perfect thing that humankind can mass produce. Okay, and there's, you know,
there's only one of you, mate.
There's a one of one, exactly.
So this thing basically, it is 99.999999. It's if 10 9% pure. That's like purer than anything. It's purer than anything we are capable of doing on a large scale. But not just that, the atoms are perfectly lined up in this amazing kind of structure. Just the fact that we can make that is crazy. It's crazy. And we do that on a daily basis, and we turn stone into something perfect. And then it goes inside billions of phones. And no one pays any attention to it.
And we order Deliveroo on it.
Yeah, exactly. You do a Deliveroo.
Yeah.
You know? And there's a wonder in all these objects. But yeah, back to your question. That journey, sorry, it's a really long answer.
It's all right.
That journey that the silicon has taken around the world, that's gone around the world a few times from one place to another to be turned into this. That machine that you're using, and by the way, at certain places, there's certain materials you can only get in one part of the world that you need. That machine that makes the silicon chips, that does the extreme ultraviolet lithography, it's a Dutch machine. But it's not just a Dutch machine. Inside, it's got parts from Germany. The lenses are made by this German company, Zeiss. You've got lasers from another German company called Trumpf. You've got kind of parts from all over the world.
This is a pencil or whatever it is, you know, that poem or the thing that you spoke about.
Yeah, the essay. So there's, exactly.
It's that, but infinitely more complex.
The world is much more complex than I think we care to think about a lot of the time. It's dizzyingly complex.
So with Trump's ambitions to, you know, deglobalize almost, do you think they're just going to, they hit a brick wall in terms of it's just not practical for you to hope to build everything?
You can't build everything domestically. No. And I think you certainly, even a semiconductor is about the most complex thing, you know, a computer chip. You couldn't, even the US actually, which has a lot of this stuff, even the US couldn't build it, couldn't make it all domestically. But I think, you know, where I'm sympathetic actually to the Trump position is we definitely are in a world now where with some of these new industries, China is incredibly dominant. And we can just be relaxed about that and say, well, it's fine that 90% of the world's batteries or 80% or so are going to come from China, which they kind of do at the moment. But that's never really been the way it's been in the past. And so, you know, for an economist, you'd look at that and go, well, it's fine. You know, we just get all of our solar panels from China and we'll get all of our, you know, batteries from China. And they can do it really cheaply. So we can have all the electric cars we want. They can make great cars these days. So let's just enjoy that. But in kind of the real world where you're worried about diplomacy and everyone's a bit nervous about a new Cold War, maybe that's a more dysfunctional kind of environment. And so I go, to be honest with you, I sometimes feel very nervous about it. And I sometimes feel like, well, the world is extraordinary and we're able to make all of these things and therefore we'll be able to solve our way out of this. And the reality is probably somewhere in between.
Do you think so? If there were to be an alternative, do you think there's any country that could take over China in actually physically producing all of these?
I mean, not at this stage.
You said that if every Western country met their ambitions of batteries, and everyone's like, we're going to build a gigafactory, China would still be 70% of production, even if everyone delivered, and we know they won't, you know?
Correct.
So they're well out in front.
You've read the book, haven't you?
Yeah, I have read the book. Yeah, yeah. I listened to it while on Audible.
It's blatant.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that you did the Audible. Like, I thought it was really good.
It makes it a lot easier.
And, I mean, maybe that's.
Did I send you to sleep?
No. I thought it's really well read, and it was just fascinating. I mean, it's kind of like, you know,
It's just you can tell, like, it's just interesting. This stuff is all interesting, and for me as a journalist, it's like, why is no one? There's so many like little scoops in there, but it's not like they're scoops where I'm having to kind of dig them out.
Yeah.
It's just there's interesting stuff, but because it's beneath the surface of these devices or these sectors that no one spends much time thinking about, like, it's all just there.
But a lot of the key thing that I wanted to kind of have in this conversation was a lot of the problems that we face because of the ethereal world, all these people thinking about the way we should conduct ourselves with each other and geopolitics. The material world might be the thing that stops that from happening, because you know, if you want your iPhone, you've got to get on with China. Do you know what I mean? Like, or other places, you know?
Yeah, I think you have to be kind of realistic.
Yeah.
And being realistic means kind of looking at all the devices we're using and recognizing that they have this hidden life, and the hidden life actually often just doesn't observe the politics that we often think about. There are parts, you know, in an iPhone and an iPad from China, but actually there are parts from the UK, you know, or at least parts that are designed in the UK, and then there are parts as well that come from Europe, and all of us we're all kind of interlinked in this world. And if you're being, you know, optimistic and hippie-ish, actually it's an amazing story, because we all do collaborate on making the world a better place. And a lot of the technologies, the thing that's kind of tantalizing about this is we have a lot of the technology to enable us to do things like net zero, which, by the way, is, and you'll know from having read the book, it is the most difficult thing, the biggest challenge we have ever signed up to. It is a much bigger deal than anyone really conceives of. When politicians were saying, oh, we'll do net zero, they had no idea of what it would actually involve. They didn't even thinking about the fact that, by the way, 90% of the food that we're eating is there thanks to fertilizers made from natural gas, because people don't really kind of think that much about how the world around them actually comes there. And so, but even though it's a massively difficult thing, a lot of the technology is now getting there to enable us to do it. And I think the real obstacle is politics, and it's that question of, you know, how relaxed is everyone going to be about the fact that we're very reliant on China to make this happen right now, at least.
To play devil's advocate, is there an alternative to lithium batteries so that we're not reliant on China? So in my MBA in Manchester, they have a graphene center, and like part of my MBA, we were looking at graphene as an alternative to lithium so that you don't have to dispose of the batteries. Could we look at, if we don't want to be reliant on China, could we look at other sources of battery power energy?
There are. By the way, I thought about graphene as a material for the book.
As one of the 6.
Yeah, but
is it really that important at this stage?
No, well, that's the thing. I thought maybe I'd have more on nanomaterials, because there's this exciting future where it's like, if you think that plastics was a massive revolution in the 50s or 50s, whenever it was. Because suddenly, whereas before you took a hunk of rock out of the ground, you kind of refined it, and then you were like, right, what do we do with this now? With plastics, you could actually design materials, because you could use these different chains of polymers to create the material you wanted. Which actually, if you think about it, it's revolutionary. I want something that's hard, but it's kind of supple. Previously, you'd have to just think, okay, well, can I get this particular type of tree and turn it into? But now, that was revolutionary. The thing with nanomaterials is you can do that at an almost atomic level. And so that is kind of exciting, but it's nowhere near changing the world in the way that plastics have changed. Plastics have changed the world. Nanomaterials, mostly for better, but also for other not good reasons that many people will be aware of. But nanomaterials, they're still not there yet, and I don't know whether they will kind of eventually get there. They need to be cheaper to make, and that's, mass producing stuff is the big thing. Like people massively underestimate the difficulty of scaling up. Scaling up is like everything, and the reason I've got these materials is we've scaled them up. We've scaled them up into things that are changing the world, including now batteries. Steel did not change the world until suddenly Bessemer came along and worked out how to churn out steel at massive volumes. But sorry, back to your question. I mean, I do have a tendency to kind of go off on random tangents. I apologize for that.
No, we love it. That's what the podcast is for.
But okay, so other materials, like you can get sodium ion batteries. They're less energy dense than lithium, but they might be good for storage. But who right now is in the lead when it comes to research and patents on sodium ion batteries?
China.
Yeah. So most of the research, most of the investment, and a lot of the kind of work right now is happening in China. And partly it's because they've been working on this stuff for just longer than Europe has. Partly it's because you've got things like kind of lower energy costs. Partly it's, bigger population. And partly it's because we're generally, especially here in the UK, we're kind of just happy to be consumers a lot of the time.
Yeah.
To just buy something, and if someone else can make it cheaper, that's just great.
We are in the ethereal world. They make stuff. They are more in that kind of material world, aren't they? The factories.
And they value it a bit more.
Yeah, that kind of work. We almost see it as beneath us, right? We're service-based economy.
Yeah.
We talk about finance and law and these kind of things, but actually it's the making of things that.
And I think it goes all the way to our education system as well. We've never been very good at creating an education system which equalizes doing technical education with, going off and doing economics or something else at a university. So there's that kind of university polytechnic thing. That was always a challenge. Creating kind of further education that meant that if someone wanted to go off and use their hands or, do kind of, more engineering stuff, but didn't necessarily want to have an engineering degree. In many other countries around the world, including Germany, that stuff is seen as more important. In China, if you look at the kind of educational statistics in Chinese universities, it is way more engineers than are coming out of pretty much any other country in the world. It's engineers. And by engineering, engineering is not the solution to everything. But with an engineering mindset, you kind of think about the problems the world has, and you look for solutions. And you're not just scratching your chin and coming up with the most plausible answer, which I think, I did a humanities degree, I did English. And I'm very plausible, and I'm quite good at, talking my way around stuff. But that's not the way we get to a solution to climate change, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
It is about trying to deploy our resources in the most sensible way and create solutions. And if you look, if you read through the book, the striking and quite inspiring thing is loads of these materials which have now changed the world. It wasn't like someone woke up one day and said, "Oh, concrete. I'm going to invent concrete today." It wasn't like, or for batteries, it wasn't like suddenly we need a battery and then a battery appears and it's like, we have a battery. These things are kind of like known challenges that exist for hundreds of years sometimes. We literally forgot the recipe to concrete. The Romans knew how to make concrete. We forgot the recipe for 1,000 years and had to reinvent it. And everyone knew there were challenges, there were races to try to.
That's why their buildings still stand, kind of thing. And we were like, how are these buildings still here?
Yeah. It's amazing. I mean, the Pantheon in Rome is the most extraordinary. Have you seen it? It's the most amazing building in the world. And when you think that is still that big kind of dome is still today the world's biggest unreinforced concrete arch or kind of dome. Today.
Yeah.
It's kind of unreal. And so, but the point is that an engineering mindset is quite useful. And I think that I do think that we are very good at, particularly in the UK, we specialize in, you've got all these PPE graduates doing kind of running the country and stuff. If you go to Oxford, as I went to Oxford, and you go through the tutorial system and you do something like PPE. I did English, but if you do those subjects, you're very plausible and you're very good at kind of the ethereal world, and you're very good at giving advice. And if someone comes to you, you can seem like you're quite authoritative. And I do think, not to do down finance, but I do think that's not unrelated to the reason why this country is really good at finance, because a lot of finance is advice, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we're really good at law, and we're really good at accountancy and consultancy. We're really good at all of that stuff. But that is not everything. And there is another part of the world which matters. And we have, I think, underplayed how important that is.
One of the pillars of personal finance is having an emergency fund so that you can withstand financial shocks. But the value of holding on to lots of cash beyond that is questionable because it just gets eaten away by inflation. You should put that money to work, and really the same goes for any money that's in your business. There's an amount you want to hold in your business account to ensure that you can weather any storms, but then you want to put the rest of the money to work, and where should you do that? I use Tide's Instant Saver account for this scenario, and they're offering new customers 3.81% AER variable on unlimited deposits until June 1st, 2025. I even use it for stuff like putting all my tax money in, so my up and coming VAT bill, I stick it in there so I can generate a little bit of a return on it in the meantime. If you'd like to give it a go, then use the code MAKINGMONEYQ1 and you'll get £100 if you add £5,000 in the first 30 days. There's a link in the description for you where you can also find a link to the full T's and C's and Tides terms. The variable rate is correct as of the 6th of February, 2025.
Because what you say in your book is to get to net zero, we need to build a lot.
Yeah.
And this is, I want to ask you a question that you asked in your book, but I first want to throw a stat from the book, if that's okay. So you said in 2019, we pulled more stuff out of the ground than we did between 1950 and the start of civilization. So in 1 year...
Data wasn't very good at that point, I need to say.
There's one guy pulling a rock out of the ground and that's your data point.
Yeah.
This idea that like at one point a guy picked up a rock and sharpened it, turned that into an axe, and that now turns into us like ripping up mountains to get gold. You know, like it's kind of mental to think about. You asked the question, are we moving from one like huge carbon footprint or like impact to another? So, you know, because in order to build all the batteries and all of the green energy, we're just going to need to rip loads of stuff out of the ground.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Yeah.
in order to, if you think about it, like just pragmatically, we've got all of these electric cars, okay, and so where do those come from? They are much more kind of metal dense than a combustion engine car, so they're heavier, and you need a lot of chemicals inside them. You know, you need the lithium, even though lithium's light, you need a lot of it in there. You need nickel and all the graphite and all of these other things. That involves a lot more mining. So just the building of all those cars is one thing. You need a totally different infrastructure for getting power to homes, because suddenly we're going to go from a situation where we're all heating our homes with gas, and we had the pipes for that. Now we're going to be heating our homes potentially with electricity, or at least that's the plan with heat pumps. You're going to need more power going to homes. You're going to need more power going to charging stations right now. Part of the limitation in like, if you go out, do you have an electric car, either of you?
No.
So part of the difficulty of getting an electric car, and part of the reason that I think a lot of people are nervous about it, is charging stations.
Yeah.
Especially in London, but they're everywhere pretty much in the UK.
Someone around the corner the other day, I was walking and she pulled up to the car next to her and she said, "How long are you going to be?" And they were like 20 minutes. And she was like, "Oh," and I was like, "Oh, she's got a problem there that I don't encounter with my car, because I just fill it up." Like she's basically driving around panicking, looking to charge it. And
you can't just sit down. It takes time.
A while, like
it takes time.
20 minutes or so.
Yeah, no, I do have an electric car. I love it, but it's a different form of logistics. You need to kind of think about.
You can on your bike today.
Yeah, I
because
can,
you're probably like, a bit
exactly.
more convenient.
Got no battery.
But so the availability of charging stations is partly a function of the fact that the grid, we don't have enough power lines going to these places. We don't have enough transformers. What are power lines and what are transformers? That's a lot of materials. It's a lot of steel. It's aluminium. It's copper. In the case of the transformers, we need loads of that stuff. So just building out the infrastructure we're going to have to kind of electrify everything, which should create this better, less polluted world. That means in the short run, we need to build loads of stuff, and that means we need to mine loads of stuff. And so in order to fulfill, and we're small in the UK in terms of our kind of how much we're going to need, partly because we've got a lot of stuff already. But around the world, you're talking about us needing to mine more copper in the next kind of couple of decades than we have in human history. And I've been to copper mines, and they are massive.
Yeah.
They are massive. I went to a place in Chile called Chuquicamata, and that is the world's biggest man-made hole. It's so big, it's like a canyon. You can barely even see the bottom. And we dug it for copper. We've been digging it for 100 years. We need another, I think, 3 of these holes. Every year, another new 3 of these biggest holes in the world every year, just to fulfill those kind of, the goals that we've set ourselves to build out this revolution. That's the underbelly of net zero. And it's not to say net zero isn't the right thing to do. It's just to say we need to just have our eyes open about this.
Because people focus on the greenhouse gas emissions and like, but people, if you said to someone, we're going to dig a hole so deep you can see it from space to stop that, people would be like, oh, that's going to destroy a lot of the natural world as well.
Doesn't sound good, does it?
No.
If it's very hard to go to a mine, and I've been to a few, it's very hard to go to a mine and not come back just quite kind of like a reeling from the experience. Because this whole book really started when I went to this gold mine, and I was doing a story for Sky about something else entirely. But I just came away from it. They were, and this is kind of one of the most advanced gold mines in the world. They're doing it right, but they were tearing down a mountain. That was the mine. There was a bit underground, but most of it was just lopping down. You could see the entire kind of side of the mountain,
wasn't it?
A sacred mountain. Yeah. So the local American, one of the people at the mine actually told me this. They said there's a local Native American tribe, the Western Shoshone people, for whom this mountain is sacred. And that actually happens a lot. A lot of the time. Now
it's like the sacred mountain is on wrists of Westerners. Your wedding ring.
But we don't think about it. I never thought about that when I was, getting my wedding ring for my wife. And I never thought about that stuff. And I felt a bit like, why?
You didn't think about it with diamonds?
I thought about it with diamonds.
Yeah.
I thought about it with diamonds.
Yeah.
But I think that's the point. There are certain things that I think have been well publicised, haven't they? You've got kind of films about that. But this is every metal, basically. It's pretty much every metal.
We have these
it's not just diamonds, it's gold, it's copper, it's everything. And because you see the gold on our hands, but the copper, it's that's underneath this device. It's underneath the wiring here. Yeah. And so it's not in your kind of mindset. Diamonds and gold are there. Copper, aluminium, all this other stuff, it's hidden away. And we hide it away. And I think we blind ourselves to the reality of how we get it. And I'm not saying that's wrong. And I'm not saying we should beat ourselves up. I'm just saying let's be conscious about it, because the more conscious we are, the more realistic we can be about trying to make the world a better place. If there's one thing to take from the book, it is, if we can't understand, or if we don't understand the world we live in right now, how on earth can we possibly understand the world we want to live in, or what that world is going to be like? Because right now we don't. We're deluded about the world we inhabit right now. And also it's interesting. The more you delve into that world, the more fascinating and amazing and wondrous it seems. And then you can't kind of leave the house without going, oh, concrete.
Yeah.
Copper, batteries moving, and it's inflating slightly when it
is cool.
For me, at least.
No. Honestly, I was walking around last night, like feeling like I'm seeing the world for the first time in terms of.
It's a bit Matrix-like, isn't it?
Yeah, like you think like what's underneath this like thin veneer of, people is like this crazy thing. One thing that I was thinking, you said, when about sand, you were like, there's no wonder that we built all this crazy stuff from sand because it's so abundant. And I was like, if it wasn't sand and it was like there was mountains of some other material, would we have made computers from that? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like, it's kind of crazy that we figured out. We were talking about eggs this morning, and just the amount of ways that we've manipulated an egg to it's in it. Like, we take a chicken's period and we just turn it into like a bajillion different things.
Do you mean like you use it like omelets?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Souffles and we take this one thing and then we extrapolate it out into millions of things. With sand, it's like this thing that's everywhere, and now it's silicon and it's chips and I'm wondering, if it was mountains of zinc, would we have engineered that? Is it us, or is it the material that's like truly genius? Do you know what I mean?
That's a really good question. I mean, yeah, I think with silicon, because with the attraction of silicon chips and silicon is something to kind of make something electrical out of. First of all, it does have certain qualities you just don't get with other kind of elements. So it's a semiconductor, which means you can force it to behave in a certain way that you want to electrically. Not everything does that. There's a few that do, like germanium and a few other things. So I think it would have had to be silicon, like however much we had. And it turns out that silicon, like the other types of semi, because this happens to be one area where a lot of people have tried to do lots of work on trying to find the ultimate other material. And there are a few other kind of alternatives that people have experimented with. But what I kind of found talking to people is it mostly still just comes back to silicon. And the fact that the world is kind of mostly made out of silicon
A useful coincidence.
Helps.
Yeah.
It helps.
Yeah.
But actually, that's more helpful for things like, silicon is hard. It's like really hard. And that's helpful because then we can use that to make concrete. If you look at, the statistics for how much stuff we're getting out of the ground, they are kind of wild, but most people think about fossil fuels and they maybe think a little bit about metals. But by far and away, the biggest thing we get out of the ground is sand. By far and away. And by far and away, the biggest use we have for that sand is building materials. We build stuff. It's concrete and it's turning it into kind of asphalt on roads. And it's making new land out of it. In China, in South China Sea, that they are making new land. In Singapore, they're expanding the size
Same
of
in
it.
Dubai.
Yeah, in Dubai as well.
Yeah.
Did you know, by the way, that we in the UK export sand to Dubai?
Wow, that's
You know
crazy
that?
because you think like they've got the goods.
Yeah, they've got deserts.
They've got
A lot of
desert.
sand.
They've got
a lot of
deserts.
sand.
Where's the sand?
Where's
from?
my-
We've got
Cornwall.
we've got a particular type of sand. Silica sand is a particular type of sand. There are hundreds of different types of sand. You could do a whole book on sand. Some people have. There are hundreds of different types of sand, but silica sand is a really pure type of sand that has like 99% silica, as in silicon, it's silicon dioxide. That's the stuff you use to make the best glass in the world. And it so happens that we have this mine up in the north of Scotland called Loch Allen, which we kind of discovered almost by mistake. It's the remains of an ancient, when this used to be kind of tropical land, it used to be, there was lots of beautiful white, pristine sand under the ground. So this stuff is really special. Here in the UK, we have some of the purest sand in the world. And so I think that's the stuff we're sending over to the desert, because you need the right kind of sand. You can't make glass out of anything. This glass actually takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of the right materials. It takes a lot of the right components. And people, we are surrounded by glass all the time. We don't think about it much. But it's still one of the most amazing technologies that humankind make. Again, okay, so with glass, is it a liquid? Is it a solid? No one can quite agree. It has properties of both. No, even scientists, even now, there was a Nobel Prize winner a few years ago, chemistry, who said, if there's one thing I would love to be able to understand, it is the chemical structure, the atomic structure of glass. And it's like, don't we know that already?
Yeah, it's everywhere.
But it's still, the wonders are still there.
So we're basically selling sand in a desert, which
We
is
sell
pretty cool.
Snow to Eskimos.
Snow to
and sand
Eskimos.
to
We're
the
selling
desert.
sand in a
That's so
desert.
good. Yeah.
Typical British
That's
thing
so
to do.
good.
Yeah.
Do you think any of these materials, not financial advice, will become more
Yeah,
valuable?
I can't give financial advice.
Will
Buying commodities.
Yeah.
That's for you guys.
Buy copper. No, don't buy. Do you think they'll become more
but
valuable in the future? Because, like, as you said,
volatile though,
yeah,
like that.
Of course.
And like you could say, I'm sure a lot of people would have bought the book, and gone, oh, lithium, that feels like an exciting thing.
Yeah.
But like, look at the lithium price. It went up, yeah, and then it's kind of come down a lot. And I think that's what happens with. I think especially with mining, and again, I'm no expert on the kind of financial advice side of things, but you get these kind of famine and feasts things. People look at the world that we're heading towards and they're like, God, we need a lot of copper.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of get into that. But then you kind of see just how volatile this is, and you see, is there going to be a backlash to net zero?
Is it because they find new copper mines?
Yeah, we
or is
could
it
find
because-
new ways of extracting it or
Or
whatever.
they find an
Yeah.
alternative way to make like something that can replace copper. Is that why, or is it just?
It's probably, well, so if you're an economist, you're kind of like, well, it doesn't matter. Either we'll find more copper or we'll substitute away from it. In practice, and this is interesting for me as someone who's kind of like more economicsy, we never really substitute away from stuff. We basically just find more of it in the ground and mine it. There's a massive misconception that once we shift from, let's say wood to coal and oil, that we stop using the wood. But we are still chopping down more wood than we ever have done before. In this country, we are producing more wood than ever before here in the UK than ever in history. Do you know that?
What do we produce?
Well, you
it for?
see
It's like, a lot of it's paper. A lot of it
you
goes
see
into
the
paper.
dead forests, don't you? That are like you drive down the motorway and you might see like a line of trees, and it's
So
just
that's forest.
they're
Exactly.
lumber trees.
But here's for me the amazing thing. Even as we're producing more wood, the amount of forest cover in this country is higher than it's been since the Middle Ages. Isn't that amazing? Because
That's some good news.
Yeah, because it's been better managed. So, but the point is, we keep just getting the stuff out of the ground. So copper, there's always these scares. And it's profound because without copper, we haven't got anything. Like, again, the reason I like bang on about copper is it is everything. We don't have electricity. We can't do anything without copper. And that's like, of all the kind of fundamental forces that matter for us these days, electricity is kind of up there. And so periodically, there's this panic. It's like, we're going to run out of copper. We're kind of, look, we've only got 40 years worth of reserves. We're going to run out, guys. And lo and behold, in 40 years' time, we've got more copper. And that's basically because we just get better at finding it. The way also that, and this is interesting, actually interesting, is interesting. Like a lot of mining companies, they talk about, they kind of make plans over kind of 30 years or so. And they say, well, for that period, we've got X amount of copper. And then someone tops that up into a spreadsheet and go, okay, we've got 200 tons of copper left in the next 40 years. That's just the way that mining companies are making their plans. It's not like we're going to run out of this stuff. But as we get deeper into the ground, it does get harder. And the amount of energy we need to expend and the water we're using along the way and the environmental damage, that does go up. And so nothing is without cost. But we as a species, we just do this. We are really good at mining and we're really bad at stopping mining. And we carry, could I give you a random example? Asbestos. Asbestos, it was banned like 25 years ago. Yeah. We are still around the world mining about, I think it's 1.4 million tons of asbestos. Right now, we are mining more asbestos than we mine lithium and cobalt combined. Asbestos. So the stuff that we think that we're not even producing anymore, we're still producing loads of it. And people still find a use for asbestos, even though we
like what?
Well, it's still used for building insulation in a lot of countries.
It's just having a good old sniff of it.
But so it's a bit scary in some senses, but it's part of who we are. And I think, part of the human story, you talked about getting rocks out of the ground. That was what we always did. We took rocks out of the ground and we turned them into tools that improved our standard of living. And once upon a time, that was like an axe. And now it's a silicon chip. But our relationship with the earth has not changed. That is part of who we are as a species. And I find that quite primarily important. We're still doing the same stuff. We're still living in the Stone Age. But the Stone Age tools are different this time. They're silicon chips. But that link hasn't gone. But we've just forgotten about it. And we've forgotten about our connection because we've detached ourselves from it so far and we've allowed so much of that to happen somewhere else. Think about Black Friday and all these gadgets we're kind of being encouraged to buy. Now think a little bit more about where that stuff comes from, and then you're kind of a bit more circumspect about, okay, I want to just understand this a bit more.
Do you have hope for the world now that you've traveled around and you've seen these like chasms and things? Has it left you optimistic or kind of pessimistic about the direction we're heading in?
Well, I'm both. Yeah, both. It depends on the time of day.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of like it is definitely a more optimistic way of looking at the world than like the way that economists typically look at the world. For most of the time I've been covering economics, everyone has been moaning about us being kind of stuck in secular stagnation. We don't have enough growth. It's a crisis. But you go and you understand, you think about how a silicon chip is made, and then you realize this is amazing. And these are new technologies that we've developed really just quite recently. And you see about batteries, and you see the fact that solar panels are becoming cheaper and more advanced every year. And the uptake of solar panels is going up all the time. So when you look at the world from that other kind of prism, it's quite inspiring. But the flip side of it is we still need to get the stuff out of the ground. And we're doing it better though. Like, I think that's the other thing. It used to be that enormous hole I was talking about in Chile, Chuquicamata, biggest man-made hole in the world. They used to just throw all of the toxic waste into the rivers. Now this is not great either. Now they put it into what's known as a tailings dam. So you're kind of putting it into something that's stored.
Bury it?
No, not quite. No, it's just out there.
Oh, just like,
Just a big old pond of toxic waste.
It is so
is it like a barrel, or is it?
It's like we drove alongside it. It's like a big wall, and behind that wall is bad stuff.
You wouldn't want to fall into that.
And the size of that tailings, that area where all the toxic waste is, and bear in mind that's not for the whole life of this mine. It has been going for like 100 years, but the size of this toxic waste dump is the same size as Manhattan.
Wow.
For one mine.
I was going to ask, do you think the ends justify the means? Like with this whole going to net zero, do you think us digging out mountains and just pillaging the planet is worth getting to like?
Well, yeah, I like
net zero, or
I think it is kind of. I'm not a climate scientist, but a lot of what I hear from them is really scary, and who am I to doubt that? I think that there is something odd about constantly kind of puffing out carbon, and I don't see why we need to carry on doing that. And I think also it's right to try and be more efficient in the future. And I do think if you look at you've got to look at things in the long run. And if you look at the amount of carbon that you're creating by, I don't know, digging up lithium and making an electric car versus making a petrol car, in the short run, it's more. But in the long run, it's less. And in the long run, it's less because you're not feeding that car with fuel that's turning into carbon and getting puffed out of the exhaust pipe. You're feeding it with power. And even that power, if it comes from gas, let's say, that is a much more efficient way of taking that energy and turning it into movement. It's just more efficient because those electric motors are much more efficient. Petrol motors, they waste a lot of energy as heat. And so electric cars really are better in most respects, apart from the charging, which is irritating. But we're getting kind of better at that. But it just takes time. And I think that part of the problem with the way that this conversation has been had about net zero is it's been about goodies and baddies and heroes and villains. You know, the nasty oil companies and the good environmental campaigners and stuff. But reality is much more complex than that. And most people understand that. And so why is the way that a lot of politicians have prosecuted things, why has that all been about crisis and baddies? And, you know, the world is complicated and there's lots of grey areas, and we're trying to make it better. And it generally does get better over time, although there are bumps in the road. You can see that, you know, our living standards are so much better than they've ever been before. The fact that years ago, the majority of us would be working in the fields, trying to get our food. Now it's a teeny tiny fraction of people who work in fields because the technology has got so much better. The fertilizers have got much better. We're able to create much more food with much fewer inputs. And the upshot of that is that we have much better living standards. We're able to just get all the food we need, which our ancestors did not have. So technology has made our lives so much better. The challenge is, because so few of us work in it, we're disconnected. So we don't relate with it and think about it in the way that we used to. And that's the point of the material world, really.
We talk about a lot of stuff on the podcast, so we just wanted to make it really easy for you to know what the key levers to building wealth are. That's why we've put together a free summary, which is 80% of what you need to know about personal finances on 2 pages. If you want this free guide, there's a link in the description.